My husband just handed me the folder. We were standing in a narrow hallway behind the ballroom, where the carpet changes from elegant blue to the practical brown they use near service doors. Somewhere beyond the double doors, a violinist was warming up, and someone laughed that careful, excited laugh people reserve for weddings. But back here it smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, and the single fluorescent tube above us hummed like a tired bee. He didn't say what was inside. He didn't explain why he'd left the reception for 10 minutes and come back with this neat, heavy folder under his arm, held like a promise. He just looked at me, really looked, and placed it in my hands. "Hold this a moment, Nora," he said quietly. "We'll do this the right way." He was calm, the way he gets when he's decided something. I felt the ridge of the metal clip through the cover, thick paper, tabs. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, not yet, because this wasn't where the story began. It began 3 hours earlier, with a place card by a trash can at my son's wedding. 3 hours earlier, I'm not a demanding woman. If you ask anyone who knows me, they'll tell you I'm the kind who irons napkins and brings safety pins, just in case. I'd pressed my dress the night before. I'd written a small toast and then rewritten it shorter because I didn't want to make anything about me. I'd put my grandmother's brooch on my lapel and tucked a letter into my purse for my son. 3 paragraphs about love that doesn't vanish when a boy becomes a man. I was on time. Early, actually. I always am. The church was lovely, high windows, soft light, the kind of worn floorboards that know how to be quiet. I sat where the usher told me, 2nd row, aisle seat, and watched my son stand at the front with a face I recognized from kindergarten and from the day he moved into his first apartment. Brave, with a little line of worry above his left eyebrow. The ceremony was quick and sweet. Vows were said. Rings slid into place. We clapped and whooped and dabbed at our eyes. In the receiving line, my new daughter-in-law kissed my cheek so quickly our skin barely met. Her perfume lingered. Her eyes didn't. "Thank you for coming," she said, as if I'd RSVP'd to a fundraiser. I told myself not to be silly. Big days make people strange. It wasn't until the reception that strangeness grew legs. The venue was one of those renovated mills everyone rents now. High ceilings. Brick, a wall of windows that make bad weather look intentional. The lobby buzzed with 2 weddings at once, ours on the left, another in the West Hall. A girl at a folding table with a calligraphy sign waved a stack of escort cards like a fan. "Name?" She smiled. "Eleanor Nora Bennett," I said. "Mother of the groom." "Lovely," she said, flipping through the cards. "Here you go." She slid a small cream rectangle toward me. "Table 18. I looked up. "Is there a mistake? I was told I'd be at table 2 with the immediate family." She blinked, then glanced to her left. The planner, clipboard, headset, efficient ponytail, stepped closer. "Oh, hi," the planner chirped. "Yes, small change. Bride's family needed extra space up front for out-of-town relatives. You're at 18. It's very close to the dance floor." It was not very close to the dance floor. It was very close to the door the catering staff used to shuttle garbage bags to the alley. When I reached table 18, the seat with my name faced the swinging service door. Every time it opened, a slice of the kitchen flashed by. Stainless steel, a pair of hands in blue gloves, a bin liner being tied. The smell wasn't awful, cleaner and onions and the ghost of coffee, but it was honest. A metal trash can sat 3 feet from the back of my chair, tucked behind a screen that hid almost nothing. At my table were 3 guests I didn't recognize and a cousin from my ex-husband's side who had not spoken to me since the divorce. He looked at my name card, then at me, then at the trash can, and gave a little snort of sympathy he didn't bother to turn into words. My husband, Mark, arrived a minute after me. He'd parked the car and took it all in with the kind of slow glance that always makes me feel seen. Former shop teacher, gentle hands, eyes that still crinkle when he laughs. He looked at my place card. He looked at the screen. He looked at my face. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. "I'm fine," I said, because sometimes fine is a kind of armor. He didn't push. He slid into the chair beside mine and adjusted it so the edge of the screen wasn't digging into my shoulder. He reached into his pocket and took out a small tin of mints, set it near my water glass like a joke only we would get. I breathed. 10 minutes later, The photographer came by to collect the mothers for family formals. Just the bride's parents, the couple, siblings, and grandparents, he said efficiently, scanning his list. We'll do extended family later. That's me, I smiled. Mother of the groom. Oh, he said, checking his page again. I have parents, bride's side, and then groomsmen. We'll catch you after the first dance. I stood there for a beat too long, holding the smile I'd brought from home. My son caught my eye from across the room. He'd been pulled into a knot of people on the bride's side. He waved and mouthed, "Later, Mom," with the same apology he used to mouth when he forgot his lunch. I went back to table 18. A server set down our salads, then lifted the screen just enough to wheel a cart through. The air curtain puffed my hair against my cheek. I pressed my napkin into my lap and tried, very hard, to pretend that facing a trash can at my only son's wedding was a small mistake in a day too full to hold perfection. It got louder by increments. When they brought out the head table, the MC announced the bride's parents who made this beautiful day possible, then her siblings, then the couple, then, after a pause, the friends who are like family. The groom's side got an umbrella phrase, and all our loved ones. The mic crackled. People clapped anyway. The planner came by our table, stooped into our little wedge of corner and service hallway, and leaned toward me with professional brightness. "Mrs. Bennett, can I ask a tiny favor?" she said. "Would you mind keeping your purse under your chair? We're just trying to keep the aisle clear for service." I glanced at the vast, empty space in the middle of the room where no one had asked anyone to keep anything. "Of course," I said, sliding my bag under my chair and catching the strap so it wouldn't touch the wet patch near the trash can. Mark's hand found my knee under the table. "Just a touch." No words. It was around then that the bride's mother approached our table, doing a small, satisfied tour of the room. She looked stunning. She truly did. Hair perfect, dress elegant. She paused beside me, the way one pauses beside a rented flower wall. "Oh, Nora," she smiled lightly, eyes already moving on. "I hope the seating works for you. We had so many last-minute changes. You understand?" "Of course," I said. "It's your daughter's day." "Exactly," she said, as if I'd passed a test. She leaned toward the screen and wrinkled her nose almost playfully. "We'll have them move that after dinner." She did not say move me. She wandered off. I set my fork down because my hand had started to shake, and I didn't want the tines to sing against the china. I thought of the letter in my purse, the one that began, "My darling boy, I loved you before you had a name." Mark stood. "Where are you going?" I asked, careful to keep my voice even. "Bathroom," he said. "And a small errand. I'll be right back." He kissed the top of my head, the quick kind of kiss you do in public because you're not the kissing in public type, and walked toward the lobby. He did not look back. He never looks back when he's doing something for me. He trusts I'll still be where he left me. I sat at my seat by the trash can and watched the room work. The DJ tested a mic. The bar line grew and shrank. The planner's headset crackled with quiet instructions. A server laughed too loud at something at table 5, then remembered herself and dropped her volume. I watched my son throw his head back at something his best man said, and for a moment I was simply happy to see his neck, the warm, vulnerable place where babies first smell like life. Then the head table clanked their glasses and the room quieted. "To the woman who raised a gentleman," the bride's father began, lifting his flute toward me. The camera lights turned, soft and bright. He paused, searched the front tables, frowned. Someone pointed. The photographer swung his light across the room, found me behind the screen, and winced. "Oh," the bride's father said into the microphone, recovering quickly. "There she is, keeping us all grounded." The room laughed. The polite laugh people make when they are asked to join hands around something sharp. I lifted my glass from table 18 and smiled. The photographer did not take the picture. That was the moment I felt my throat close, not because of shame, exactly, but because of a small, precise grief, my son's wedding day and the space I occupied in it. I could live with it. I could, but I could also tell the difference between acceptance and erasure. Mark returned as the salads were being cleared. He was not breathless. He was not angry. He looked like himself, steady, polite, the man who can fix a wobbly table with a folded matchbook and a smile to the waiter. "Walk with me for a second?" he asked. I followed him past table 12, where the bride's cousins were taking selfies, and table 3, where my sister was doing her best to make conversation with people who did not want it. We slipped through the side door into the hallway where deliveries arrive, where events are built and unbuilt and everything smells honest. Mark led me a few steps further toward a small door marked "Office." He knocked once, lightly, then opened it with his knuckles because his hands were full. My husband just handed me the folder. He placed it in my hands like a delicate plate. The top tab read Vendor Agreements. The second, Payment Authorizations. The third, Facility Contract. The fourth tab I couldn't see. The paper was warm from being held. A blue sticky note peeked from the edge with our last name in his neat block letters. "I'm going to speak," he said softly, very calmly, to 3 people. "You won't have to say a word unless you want to, but first, I need you to hold this." "Mark," I whispered, my voice catching somewhere between confusion and relief. "What is this?" He smiled, the kind of small private smile I've loved for 23 years. "It's the part where we stop pretending you don't matter." He rested his palm on the folder for a moment, as if blessing it, then stepped past me toward the ballroom doors. I stood there under the tired fluorescent light, the hum louder now that I had stopped moving. I looked down at the folder and thought about the place card at table 18 and the screen and the smell of onions, and I realized I was holding not anger, not revenge, but planning. Quiet, careful, adult planning. Behind the door, someone tapped a microphone. The first dance music swelled and then faded. I didn't open the folder. Not yet. I took a breath, pressed the folder to my chest, like a book you know is about to change the way you stand, and followed my husband back into the room. The sound that stopped the room wasn't loud. It was the click of a microphone being turned on. "Ladies and gentlemen," said my husband's voice, calm, deep, the kind that carried without needing volume. It was the same tone he used when my son was 12 and had broken a neighbor's window. Firm but patient, almost kind. Every face turned toward him, including mine. He stood near the DJ's table, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a sheet of paper he must have taken from the folder. The violinist stopped mid-song. Even the planner froze. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Mark said, "but before the next dance I have something to clear up." The bride's mother straightened in her seat. The bride herself looked toward the head table with that flicker of irritation you only show when you think the problem belongs to someone else. Mark smiled politely at her. Not warm, not cold, just steady. "You see," he continued, "today was meant to be about family, love, respect. I think we can all agree that's what marriage should stand on." He paused. "But when a family forgets what respect looks like, sometimes a reminder helps." A whisper rippled through the crowd. Small, nervous laughs that weren't sure if they were supposed to exist. My son half stood from his chair. "Dad," he started. Mark lifted a hand gently. "Sit down, son. This isn't against you," he motioned toward me. "This is about her." And suddenly, the 100 people in that room turned to look at me. The woman from table 18, the one sitting next to a trash can. My mouth went dry. I could feel every heartbeat in my palms. Mark continued, his voice unshaken. "The woman you seated by the garbage, who baked your groom's cake, who raised the man you just married, who paid for this entire venue, quietly, because she didn't want credit. That woman is my wife." The room went still. No clinking glasses. No shuffling plates. Just silence that rang louder than any music. Mark opened the folder in his hand. The tabs peeked out like a lineup of witnesses. "These," he said, holding up the first set of papers, "are the payment receipts. Every deposit made by my wife's account. Every final balance cleared by her signature." He turned a page. "And this," he lifted a blue slip of paper, "is the clause from the contract stating that any disrespectful conduct toward the payee grants full cancellation rights." The planner paled. The bride's father blinked twice, as though trying to recall the exact language he'd signed. Mark closed the folder slowly, precisely. "So here's what we're going to do," he said softly, almost conversationally. "We're going to give my wife the respect she deserves, or we're going to end this celebration right now. Every light, every plate, every rented flower wall, all of it stops the moment she says so. You could have heard a pin drop." The bride looked to her mother, her eyes wide. The older woman stood up too quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. "There's no need for drama," she said tightly. "It was a simple oversight." "Of course," Mark nodded. "And a public apology will correct that oversight nicely." The planner whispered something into her headset. Two servers froze mid-step, holding trays of champagne that suddenly seemed far too heavy. My son stood then, properly this time, and crossed to me. He looked like a boy again, nervous and red-eyed. "Mom," he said softly. "I didn't know." I believed him. That was almost the saddest part. He turned to the room and cleared his throat. "Everyone, my mother deserves to be at the front. She deserves more than this. I didn't realize—" His voice cracked, and for a heartbeat, he was 5 years old, apologizing for breaking my favorite mug. Mark placed the folder on a nearby table and slid an arm around my shoulders. "You don't need to explain, son," he said gently. "Just learn." Someone began to clap. One person, then another, cautious, uncertain, until it swelled into something that felt like air after a storm. The planner was already moving chairs, rearranging place settings. The bride stood frozen, pale as lace. Mark turned to me and smiled faintly. "Would you like to move to the head table, Mrs. Bennet?" I smiled back, small but certain. "No," I said quietly. "I think I'd like to dance." He took my hand, and the crowd parted. The DJ, bless him, had the good sense to pick a soft song, the same one Mark and I had danced to at our own wedding 30 years ago. It felt poetic, even though we hadn't planned it. As we moved slowly across the floor, the whispers faded. I could feel my son's gaze on us, a mixture of shame and love. Somewhere behind me, I heard the bride's mother mutter something about overreaction. I didn't care. For the first time that day, I felt visible. When the song ended, Mark kissed my hand, then leaned close. "Check the last tab in the folder," he whispered. I frowned. "What's in it?" he smiled. "A surprise for later." He set the folder on our new table, front and center, and went to fetch us a drink. I opened the folder after he left. Hands trembling, half afraid, half curious. Inside, under the tabs marked contracts and receipts, was one final envelope with my name in his handwriting. On the back, a short note. "For when you forget how powerful grace looks on you. Love. M." I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. The rest of the night was almost kind. The speeches were shorter, the laughter quieter. My son came to hug me twice, whispering, "I'm sorry," into my hair. The bride smiled the way people do when they've just been reminded of consequences. But the moment that stayed with me wasn't public. It was later. When Mark and I stood outside in the cool air, the music muffled behind the glass doors. He looked up at the stars, then down at me. "You did nothing wrong," he said simply. "Remember that." And for the first time in years, I believed him. The wedding ended like a firework that sputters out before the last bang. People still smiled, but too carefully. The laughter sounded polite, not joyous. My son tried his best to keep the mood afloat, dancing with his new wife, checking on guests, but something in his eyes had dimmed. He looked like a man who'd just seen his reflection in a cracked mirror and wasn't sure how to put it back together. Mark stayed near me the whole evening. Not hovering, just present. The kind of quiet protection you feel more than you see. Every time someone came close to apologize, he'd give me a look that said, "You owe them nothing." By the time the last toast was made and the last chair was stacked, the air had turned heavy with exhaustion and regret. I held the folder under my arm like a fragile secret. Outside, the cold hit us, sharp and clean. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. A thin fog had rolled in, softening the edges of everything. Mark walked me to the car, opened the door, and waited until I was seated before speaking. "You still haven't opened it, have you?" he asked gently. "No," He smiled a little. That's very you, meaning? You always wait for the right moment, even if the right moment never comes. I looked at the envelope again. The paper was thick, cream-colored. My name written in his careful handwriting, the same one he used when labeling our Christmas boxes in the attic. Open it when you're ready, he said, starting the engine. Not before, but don't wait forever. The morning after, I woke early before sunrise. The house was quiet, except for the slow hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I made coffee, 2 cups like always, even though Mark was still asleep. Then I sat at the table, the folder in front of me. I ran my fingers over the top flap, tracing the crease where it had bent from being held. Then I pulled out the envelope. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, stapled together. The first line made my breath catch. Confidential, legal notice, beneficiary transfer agreement, primary ownership. Nora Bennett. For a moment, I couldn't make sense of the words. It was a deed. A property transfer, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Mark had quietly transferred the title of his construction company's building into my name. The note attached said simply, "If anything ever happens, you decide what stays and what ends. It's your turn to hold the pen, not the clipboard." Tears blurred the print. I didn't even realize I was crying until one fell on the edge of the paper and left a small, dark mark. He hadn't told me because he wanted to show me, at the right time, when I finally remembered my own worth. The second document was stranger. It was a copy of an old email chain between Mark, a law firm, and a woman I didn't recognize. It mentioned unauthorized withdrawals and family-related misuse of business accounts. I frowned, scanning the text. The name jumped out at me halfway down the page. Ethan Bennett, my son. My chest went cold. The hidden truth, I heard the floorboard creak behind me. Mark stood in the doorway, wearing his robe, his face pale but calm. "You found it," he said quietly. "What is this, Mark? Why is his name on this?" He sat opposite me, hands folded, gaze steady. "You remember the missing funds from last spring? The ones I said were just accounting errors?" "Yes," I said slowly. "You said your partner mishandled a few things." He shook his head. I lied. It wasn't my partner. I gripped the edge of the table. "It was Ethan?" He nodded once. "He took money from the business account. It started small, wedding expenses, car payments, then more. I didn't want to believe it, but the bank statements didn't lie. I felt like the floor had tilted beneath me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he was our son," Mark said softly. "And because I wanted to believe he'd fix it before you ever had to know." I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. "And this," I gestured to the folder, to the documents. "What were you planning to do?" "I didn't want to ruin his wedding day," Mark said. "But I also wasn't going to let him start a new life on a lie. That folder was proof and protection. For you, for us. If he ever tried to drag us into his mess, you'd have the documents to clear our name." My throat tightened. "You were ready to expose him last night?" He shook his head. "No. Only if he pretended you didn't exist." I covered my face with my hands. The pieces were starting to fit. Why he was so calm when he stood up. Why his words felt rehearsed, but kind. He hadn't just defended me. He'd been testing our son, and our son had failed quietly, without even realizing it. The phone call around noon. The phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice trembled. "Mom, can I come over?" My first instinct was to say yes. It always had been. But something in me had shifted overnight, a mix of clarity and exhaustion. "Come," I said finally. "But don't bring anyone else." He arrived 20 minutes later. Still in his tuxedo shirt, the tie hanging loose. His eyes were swollen from crying or lack of sleep, maybe both. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said before he even sat down. "I didn't know they'd put you back there." "I swear I didn't. It was all not about the wedding," I said softly, sliding the folder across the table. "This?" He froze. "What is that?" "You tell me." He hesitated, then opened the folder. His face drained of color as he saw the documents, the bank transfers, the lawyer's correspondence. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "Mark found out months ago," I said quietly. "He tried to protect you, both of us. But I think you owe us the truth now. Tears welled in his eyes. I was going to pay it back, I swear. The wedding? It got out of control. The vendors wanted deposits, and we thought, we? He swallowed. Grace. The planner said it would look bad if we cut corners. The planner. The same woman who had seated me by the trash. I felt something sharp and final settle inside me. Ethan, I said, my voice steady now, you didn't just steal money. You let your father carry your guilt and let me be humiliated in front of strangers. He covered his face. Mom, please. Mark appeared in the doorway then, silent as ever. He looked at Ethan, not with anger but with something heavier. Disappointment that weighed like stone. We're not pressing charges, he said. Yet, but you're going to make this right. Every dollar. Every apology. Every lesson. Ethan nodded through tears. That night, after he left, Mark sat beside me on the porch. The autumn wind carried the faint smell of rain. Do you regret how I handled it? He asked quietly. I thought for a long time before answering. No, I said. Because sometimes justice doesn't have to humiliate. It just has to wake someone up, he nodded. And redemption? I looked toward the dark street where our son's car had disappeared hours ago. That part, I said, is his job now. Mark smiled faintly. Good, because I think you've done enough saving for one lifetime. I leaned my head against his shoulder. The folder rested on my lap, thinner now, but heavier with truth. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. The week after the wedding felt like walking barefoot through broken glass, not sharp enough to kill, but impossible to ignore. Everyone went silent in their own way. The phone hardly rang. No congratulations, no gossip. Not even the usual, how was the wedding? Texts from neighbors. I think word had spread about what happened, or at least about the tension. Small towns have a way of stitching rumors faster than truth ever can. Mark returned to work, pretending to bury himself in blueprints and deadlines. But I knew he was still watching the fallout unfold, the way a builder inspects cracks in a wall to see if they'll spread. And Ethan. He didn't come around for days. The only sign of him was an envelope that appeared in our mailbox that Thursday morning. No return address. Just our names typed neatly on the front. Inside was a check, the exact amount he'd taken from the business account, and a short note, I'm starting over. Grace and I are separating. I'll make things right, one step at a time. EI stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. It wasn't the money that made my chest ache. It was the word separating. I'd seen it coming, of course. Guilt has a way of cracking fragile marriages before they even set. But seeing it in black ink made it real. Mark read it quietly, then folded it once and set it on the table. He's trying, he said simply. That's what matters. I wanted to believe that. I really did. 3 weeks later, Ethan came by unannounced. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where sunlight filters through curtains like a half-remembered prayer. Mark was pruning the rose bushes out front. I was baking, something mindless to keep my hands busy. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, hair uncombed, tie loose, eyes hollow, I didn't feel anger. Just the ache that comes when someone you love looks smaller than you remember. Hi, Mom, he said, voice thin. Hi, I answered. Come in, he hesitated. Are you sure? I'm always sure when it comes to you, I said. But that doesn't mean I'm blind. We sat in silence for a moment. He looked around the house, the photos, the old armchair, the smell of cinnamon, and something in his face softened, like a man who'd been wandering too long finally seeing home. I messed everything up, he whispered. Not just with you and Dad, with Grace too. I thought money could fix the way people see us. I thought if everything looked perfect, it would be perfect. And was it? I asked gently. He shook his head. No, it was hollow. Like all the decorations at that reception, beautiful from far away, but nothing close up. I reached across the table and took his hand. Ethan, your father and I didn't raise you to be perfect. We raised you to be honest. You can rebuild a life from failure. You can't rebuild one from lies. Tears gathered in his eyes. I don't deserve forgiveness. No one deserves forgiveness, I said softly. That's what makes it powerful. Mark entered then, wiping his hands on a towel, and looked at Ethan. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mark stepped forward and did something I hadn't expected. He hugged him, not a brief, awkward hug, a real one. Long enough for Ethan to break down against his father's shoulder. Long enough for both men to remember they were still family. The following months were quieter, not easy, but calm in the way fields grow back after a fire. Ethan started working under Mark again, this time as an assistant instead of a partner. No titles, no privileges, just a man learning how to earn back trust, hour by hour. And he did. He showed up early, stayed late, took coffee runs, fixed things no one asked him to fix. The workers began to notice, then respect him. He stopped talking about what he deserved and started saying what he could do. One afternoon, I stopped by the workshop with lunch. Mark was at his desk, and Ethan was sanding a frame by hand, sawdust caught in his hair. He looked up, smiled, not the polished smile I'd seen at the wedding, but something real, unguarded. "Mom," he said, walking over. "You brought food?" "Just sandwiches," I said, setting them down. "Nothing fancy," he laughed softly. "Fancy is overrated." That single line, plain as bread, felt like the final thread in a wound finally healing. A few months later, I received a call from Grace. Her number flashed on the screen, unfamiliar now that she'd changed her name back to her maiden one. "Nora," she began, her voice shaking. "I wanted to apologize. For the way things went, for how I treated you." I said nothing for a moment. Then, "I accept your apology, Grace. I hope you find peace." She exhaled audibly. "I'm in therapy now," she said quickly, like it mattered that I knew. Trying to figure out why I kept choosing image over love. "Then you're already halfway there," I said gently. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done, like a story that had finally written its own ending. It was almost a year later, on the morning of our anniversary, when I found another envelope on the kitchen table. This one wasn't from Ethan. It was from Mark. He'd left early for work. But the note was short and written in that same, steady handwriting I'd come to trust more than any spoken word. "Nora, this year wasn't easy, but you carried it with grace. You've taught me that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to disappear. Dinner tonight? Same place we went after our wedding? No surprises this time, just us. Love you always. M." I smiled through tears. For once, the folder on the counter wasn't a burden of secrets. It was a symbol of survival, of everything we'd rebuilt, piece by piece. I poured coffee, watched the steam curl like forgiveness rising into morning light, and realized something simple but powerful. Justice had already been served, redemption had already begun, and I was no longer the woman seated by the trash, was the woman who had stood back up. It's strange how silence can be louder than words. Year had passed since that wedding, the one that had started with humiliation and ended with truth. Yet even now, sometimes when I walk past a restaurant kitchen or hear the clang of a service door, a part of me still remembers that chair by the trash, the way the planner smiled as if she'd done me a favor, the way no one thought to move me until Mark did. But the memory doesn't sting anymore. It doesn't bruise, it just reminds me who I became that night. I used to think grace meant staying quiet, smiling through discomfort, being the one who holds the family together no matter how much it hurts. But that night, when my husband placed that folder in my hands, I realized that grace isn't silence. It's dignity, and dignity sometimes needs a voice. I was sitting on the porch one afternoon, the same porch where Mark and I had watched Ethan drive away a year ago, when he pulled up again. This time, he wasn't slumped or afraid. He looked steady, grown. He stepped out of the truck with 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag. "Peace offering," he said, smiling shyly. "Depends on what's inside," I teased. He handed it to me. Inside were 2 blueberry muffins from the bakery I used to take him to when he was little. The bag was warm, the smell instantly softening everything inside me. "Thought maybe we could start over," he said. "No speeches, no guilt, just breakfast," I nodded. "I'd like that." We sat there for a long time, not needing to fill the air. The past had already spoken enough for us. Finally, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about rebuilding a life from failure." I didn't understand it then. But now I do. Why? I asked, curious. Because I had to fail to learn how to build anything real. And because you and Dad didn't give up on me, even when you should have. I smiled. That's what parents do, Ethan. We hold on long enough for our children to find their own hands. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You know, I think you're the strongest person I know, I laughed softly. Strong doesn't always mean brave. Sometimes it just means tired but still standing. He grinned, and for a moment, I saw the boy who used to run down the hallway in his pajamas, chasing imaginary dragons. That evening, Mark and I went to dinner at the same small Italian restaurant we'd visited after our wedding 30 years ago. The owner still remembered us, still made the same garlic knots that left your fingers shiny with butter. We sat by the window this time. No noise, no spotlight. Just two people who had learned what love actually looks like after the party ends. Mark raised his glass. To survival, he said simply. To grace, I replied. He smiled. To both. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. It had already done its job, shaping us, humbling us, stitching us back together with threads stronger than before. If you asked me now what that year taught me, I'd tell you this. People think betrayal is the worst kind of pain. It's not. The worst pain is being invisible to the people you've loved your whole life and realizing you helped them forget you by never reminding them who you were. But the beautiful thing about invisibility is that it can end the moment you decide to step into the light again. That's what I did, and it changed everything. I learned that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. That forgiveness doesn't erase wrongs. It frees the one who carries them, and that sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers, I know what you did, but I choose to rise anyway. On the first anniversary of Ethan's new life, a year sober, a year honest, a year rebuilding, he invited us to his small apartment. No grand gestures this time, just family, homemade lasagna, and laughter that didn't sound forced. He stood to make a short toast. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. To my parents, he said, looking at both of us, who taught me that you can lose everything and still have everything that matters. Thank you for not giving up on me. Mark's hand found mine under the table, just like it had the day he handed me that folder. When we clinked glasses, I realized something. The folder that once held evidence of betrayal now symbolized redemption. The same hands that once carried proof of wrongdoing now held forgiveness. And in that moment, I finally understood what my husband meant that night when he whispered, We'll do this the right way. He didn't mean revenge. He meant love with a backbone. So if anyone ever asks me what happened after they seated me by the trash at my son's wedding, I'll tell them this. They thought they'd buried me in humiliation, but I was just being replanted. Because sometimes life has to break you open, not to destroy you, but to show you what's still alive inside, and what's still alive in me is stronger than ever. Grace doesn't mean staying quiet when you're disrespected. It means standing tall, without needing to shout. Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration, and redemption begins when the truth finally finds a safe place to live. Let us know in the comment, where are you watching from? Please subscribe to the channel Her Side of the Story. Thanks for watching until here.